All right, this is Learning Activity A, Government and History Basics. Please add 3 pieces of notes to the first part about history and the second part about government. You may just add 2. All right, so there are some basic things about history. Basically, history and the past are 2 things. Most of the time, people use them as interchangeable. But what we need to recognize is that history is actually a story or a narrative that people tell about the past. She made history with that speech isn't the same as she made this speech in the past. So the event that I typically give as an example to try to help you figure this out is me and my brother down in the basement. My brother and I are down in the basement. I decide when I'm young that I want a piece of candy. He will not give me a piece of candy, so I punch him. He goes upstairs and tells my dad that I choked him because my dad only cares if I choke my brother. He doesn't really mind if I punch him for some reason. So my dad needs to be convinced by Chris that I actually was choked, or I actually choked him. I told my father that my brother attacked me first. My dad has listened to 2 different versions of the past. So he's listened to 2 different narratives of the event. The event itself is the past, Chris's version, CJ's version, and then ultimately what Dad decides is the history of it. Those are all different stories, and none of them are just like the event. The past is not subjective. It did happen. There's no sort of interpretation about it. Anything that is interpreted is sort of the human element of it. Just like you can see this picture here with the watches, there are watches and they are real, but have been interpreted by the artist to be sort of malleable and folding over and falling. The past, we just define the past as something that happens immediately after the present. You can't create it. You can't recreate it. You can't relive it. Time machines aren't real. The story about it is never like the event, just like the event. History itself, just like these 2 political cartoons here, are often different. You can see the past is the same. Ronald Reagan was the same president, but yet you have a person on the top that thought that Ronald Reagan was a really good guy, and the person on the bottom that didn't like Ronald Reagan so much. So they have different versions of the same past. All stories have bias. No matter how hard you try, you cannot eliminate bias. History can be created by anyone who has access to evidence, the primary sources. My father had primary sources when he looked at the welt on my brother's head, when he heard the stories of us, that people who were actually there. He had these primary sources to determine what he thought the narrative was. However, historians are people who are professionals who have been trained in a particular way, and who actually read each other's book and critically acclaim those particular books, or say these are good, these are bad. And something that you don't typically know is that there's actually a bunch of controversy about history. Since it is a story, since it is narrative, there's a ton of controversy. For example, who are the progressives? That's going to be a unit that we cover. The actual people who are the progressives are going to change based on who the author thinks that they are. So why do you even learn it? Well, you can understand our country's past and be able to appreciate American values. American values like working hard. You can understand that there's a Protestant moral behind that because of Protestants creating the massive amount of early Americans. Whether you like it or not, you're going to watch TV sometime and you're going to be able to see basic ideas that we teach about in class, and you're going to start understanding some of the events that are going on around the world and around our country. That will happen to you during this class at some point. You don't want to be a sucker. You can learn more powerful critical thinking skills, prevent you from being misled. You can question people when they tell you the versions of the story, and you can think about what bias that they may have or what reasons behind it. Not all the time is there bias like my brother and I's version of the story where we're trying to literally deceive my father, but a lot of times the bias is undetected and unknown by the author himself. You'll be able to appreciate places and people more completely without fearing differences if you understand it. The very first thing that leads to understanding, right, the very first step towards that is knowledge. Once you have knowledge of things, understanding will follow. And if all else fails and you have no other reason why you should work at this class, it's just this. You can't graduate without U.S. history. Graduation from high school equals more money for your future jobs. Unfortunately, without a high school diploma, getting a decent job is very difficult.